Hello, this is James Hudnall and another episode of Creative Secrets. This one is episode 33, and it's about conscious characters, or more importantly, the importance of conscious characters, because frankly, they are much more important than you realize, and you may not even know what they are, so let me explain. A conscious character is a character in the story, usually a side character that's a friend or mentor or associate of your protagonist. They have an importance in the story in that they provide a moral center or a counter argument to whatever the hero is thinking or trying to do. It's a way to keep the main character in balance. Try to imagine the old cartoon idea of an angel and a devil sitting on the shoulder of a character. The conscious character is the angel. The devil character would be representing the counter argument. But the main purpose of a conscious character is to keep some kind of a moral center to the story. The reason this is important and why it's a problem that it's lacking in so much current stuff is that people naturally gravitate towards goodness. They try to be good. I mean, there's obviously a lot of people who aren't that way, but the average person would like to think of themselves as a decent person. And there's a general consensus about what makes a decent person. It doesn't have to be political, and it shouldn't be political. It has to do with just treating people right and not being evil, in the basic sense of the word. And we all understand that it's human nature for us to sometimes go off the rails or to do things that we shouldn't. And it's important also, as I've said before in the storytelling, that your characters do things that the reader or the audience will appreciate or agree with. Because if you don't do those things, the audience will lose interest or they'll lose any kind of empathy for your character. They'll start disliking the character, and you don't want to do that unless you really are trying to do that. So what the conscious character does is provide a voice in the story to the character, the main protagonist, that tells them, that questions what they're doing if they do something that we don't like. And let me explain a perfect example of how that works. If you've ever seen the classic show Star Trek, the original series, those three main characters, Kirk, Spock, and McCoy, are actually a perfect example of how conscious characters can integrate with each other. And that is, you have Spock as the rational conscious character. He's the one that makes observations that are more rational and thoughtful, whereas McCoy is the emotional one. He's making emotional arguments, passionate arguments, but they're both generally conscious characters because they're both coming from a perspective that they personally feel is good. Whereas, as I said, Spock is not the emotional one. So his arguments are more like the rational mind, whereas McCoy is more like the emotional mind. So even though they are characters with a distinct personality, they are representing sort of a part of the conscious, but different parts of the conscious. This is one reason why that show is so successful and why it resonates over time, and it's still something that people watch, because those characters' interplay is very good. And basically you have with Kirk a kind of a brash, egotistical, confident character who is able to make decisions on his own, but he's willing to listen to his officers and he's willing to take their counsel. So it's actually very good. And the reason that the newer Trek shows don't work as well, in fact some of them fail, is they don't have this dynamic. They don't have that kind of interplay because, for example, let's look at the current movies that they're making. the Star Trek movies that came out. Kirk and McCoy in those movies don't act in the way that the original cast did. The actors that are playing them are very good, but they're just imitating their personality, their way that they talk and everything like that. But the writing fails because the writing is where everything happens. Writing is the key. An actor is only as good as the writing that they're given. So if the writing doesn't support the actor is kind of left holding the bag. And, that's why a lot of them don't like that when the writing is bad. The trouble with the newer things is they focus more on spectacle rather than the kind of powerful drama that the best Star Trek shows had. And the drama comes from, again, the interplay of the characters. We've discussed how you can show the dimensions of a character through their interactions with others. The conscious character kind of pulls on a certain moral side of the main character and affects the moral side of the main character. So it's important to have a conscious character in order to make the story grounded. Otherwise, when you don't have it, you have stories that tend to drift into amoral territory, and it turns people off. Even today, even though you could argue that Hollywood has worked aggressively to try to make the culture less immoral and more libertine. Instead, what we have is a culture where there's a lot of lecturing from people who take high moral positions as they think, what they call the high horse position. But actually what they're doing is they're trying to push certain agendas on people, and they're using emotional arguments that aren't necessarily based on logic or reality. This is a trap you want to avoid. Conscious characters are not there to lecture. They're not there to preach. They're there to provide a counter-argument that stands in support of a moral position. So again, morality is not political. Morality is morality. It's based on things that most people can relate to, like murder is bad, rape is bad, stealing is bad. Those are the things that most people can relate to and understand. What a conscious character does is it keeps your protagonist on the side of good, more or less, provided that's the direction you want the story to go. But what it does is it gives us a center for the story so that we have like a position that we can latch onto. This is a side of good, this is a side of bad. You may think, well, people know that, but actually you kind of need that in a story so that people can feel their way around in it and they can see where the motives are. Ultimately, people will judge your story based on whether they can accept the reality that you've spun for them and whether that reality is something that they can morally agree with. And again, this is something that can be very effective and it can be very powerful if it's done right. It can be very bad if you don't do it right and if you mess it up. So it's good to think about this, and if you don't have a moral compass, maybe you should get one because it's important as a writer to have one. So that's it for this episode, and please check the links below. Please subscribe. Please like this video if you can. I'd really appreciate it, and I will see you next time.